Welcome to Great Power Politics. In today's class, we will talk about cybersecurity. I think this is a really interesting topic because it goes beyond the kind of traditional and conventional form of conflict between different countries, and we are looking at something which is kind of tightly connected to new technology as well. So, as we all know, our lives become much more virtual, and the internet becomes much more important in our daily activities. But at the same time, this virtual world becomes also more important in terms of security and protecting the prosperity of a country. So we do have different scenarios where cybersecurity is becoming a vital aspect of the security structure of each country. This can be around protecting the economy. It can also be around protecting key infrastructure. But even in recent years, we have seen that protecting the political process, including elections, etc., becomes a vital issue of cybersecurity. So in this class, I would like to kind of look at this topic from a very kind of top-down, broad perspective and see how it affects the thinking about security in countries in the future. So I hope you will enjoy this class, and I will go right into the slides. Thank you.
So here we are back. So the topic today is cyber challenges and global stability. And we are looking here at several aspects. I want to kind of focus on defining what a cyber threat actually is, a little bit very in the beginning. Then I want to look at businesses in cyber peace, because one aspect which is quite different in this topic towards other topics is that private companies play a much stronger role and a much more important aspect of defining cyberspace. And there cyber threats are also very closely related to the ideas of this cyberspace. And so I want to highlight some of the aspects which corporate social responsibility, as well as best practice in businesses as well. And then I want to talk about kind of an emergent development towards law of cyber peace and national security strategies, etc. So kind of looking at how governments are dealing with this, and also at the end being a bit critical about current laws, but then also kind of talking about existing cyber threats. And at the very end, I would like you to actually kind of think a little bit more about those threats and how likely they are to escalate international tensions or not. If we define cyberspace, we have something which is often called tangible goods, intangible goods, and something network related. What do we mean is tangible goods? Tangible goods are usually the things which are existent, for example, server spaces, hardware, etc. All of these are real kind of products, and they're kind of therefore called tangible. Intangible is things like information, activities on the web, services, but also virtual reality and all these kind of services, which are part of they're part of the cyberspace, but not necessarily something which is material like the tangible goods. And then we have a third section, and that is called network related. That means that actually kind of the network itself is seen as cyberspace, not necessarily the services and not necessarily the hardware, but the network itself. And there are kind of certain variations. So the internet, for example, as a network is seen as cyberspace by many actors. Other forms of networks, like network protocols, etc., can be seen as interceptions, and as well as communication. So we do have what we see here on the very left is the definitions of different countries. So in a way, we have very different definitions. These are all Western countries, by the way. Some are more inclusive, others less inclusive. Many of them include the tangible goods, but there are big variations in the intangible and the network aspect. We do see that Oxford Dictionary, for example, actually doesn't include any tangible goods, just the intangible virtual internet and communications between them. Communications is used by only few countries, but most notably the United States. The United States thinks cyberspace as the most complete kind of application, complete kind of definition, except including applications. So in a way, that's something which is included, for example, in the UK, also by the international regulating bodies like ISO and ITU. These are included, but by the United States not. Several other European countries also don't include them. So we do that. What we have to take away from this is that there's a cyberspace in itself. The definition is quite disputed and varies across different countries, and also different kind of entities like dictionaries, etc. So so in this way, it's not as easy to actually tackle it. So in a way, what we can see is that all countries are really interested in regulating or governing the internet. And so the internet primarily started out as a self-governing body, which is governed by its users, not kind of a state project, which has kind of clear defined authorities already in the very beginning. But over the recent years, I would say actually more than last 10 years, we do see that countries are becoming more and more eager to have a say in the regulation of the internet. One thing is that there is a worry by states that this area is not easy for the government to control, and also a good place for kind of starting criminal activity, kind of disrupting the lives of citizens, etc. So we have like lots of activity versus like for child pornography, crime on the internet, as well as drug trafficking, and also crimes like fraud, etc., which are kind of most countries are eager to prevent. But it is difficult for them to do this without having a say in the governance, but also it is difficult. It's very often ends up with intruding the privacy of many people. And so it has been, many countries have, also many people in countries have a very critical stand versus towards regulating the regulating bodies. A very different approach has been done in China, where it's much more approach what they call internet sovereignty. So the idea here is not that China tries to transform the internet for its own citizens in a way that it is not necessarily completely free, and that you cannot move around the world on the internet. but rather that there is a Chinese internet, which is primarily under the control of the Chinese state. And therefore, they have very strong tools in monitoring, censoring, and filtering information, as well as surveillance of its citizens through the internet, in terms of if people are saying things which are not going along with party lines, or kind of asking other people to kind of join protests or something like this. Internet sovereignty. China is dealing with this with kind of censoring it and kind of heavily monitoring the internet. One concern which comes out of this, and which is really against the initial founders of the internet, is this idea about internet balkanization. So it means that certain situations that are, depending on which country you are, you have different forms of internet. So this is something which exists already with China, where many of the most frequently used service providers are not available. To name some, we could think about either Google or Facebook, but also messengers like WhatsApp, Line, Twitter. All of them are not available in China, while they have their own kind of platforms around it. So there is WeChat, there is Weibo, there is several other kind of platforms which are very prominent within China, but with one big difference, and that is that there is no freedom over these of these services, but that the information is kind of monitored and censored by the Chinese government, and therefore they have strong controls over what information is posted, who can read it, and how it goes on. The interesting part here is that this is really happening in the background. So users don't necessarily notice if things have been censored. So if you post something which has been censored, then obviously you can see that this has been censored, but all other people just don't notice it, and it's acting so seemingly that often people are not aware that censorship is actually happening. This goes really very much against the ideas of internet freedom, which we have in many Western countries, where the internet should be free and that all information can be accessed. However, having said that, there are problems with this kind of freedom as well, and that is the problems every kind of state has in certain limitations. So spreading fake news is something which is a very common problem in recent years, where we actually see that that people can place misinformation very prominently, and therefore reach a considerable amount of people to actually see this as real news. So fake news is a very interesting topic there, because it actually kind of plays on this notion of freedom versus correct information as well. There are other things which are kind of playing into this, and that is, for example, ideas about criminal activities, as I had before, which or spread of issues like hatred, internet hatred, mobbing of people is also something which is quite prominent and needs to be in certain ways controlled by the state. But the balance is very different to strike between freedom and control. So what we do see is actually the signing of the World Conference on the International Communications in 2012 are certain countries which are kind of wanted to promote free internet and free of major censorship, etc. What we do find here is many countries of European countries, Japan, India, Mongolia for that matter, but also Australia, New Zealand, certain Latin American countries, as well as the US and Canada are kind of the major supporter of this. And so we do have different aspects and different kind of ideas how the internet should work. Most authoritarian systems have a certain form of censorship in place. This is, of course, there because worry of free flow information might lead to a loss of control, and therefore subsequently could lead to a loss of power as well. So if we kind of think about cyber threats, we always think, or very frequently think about very big things like what we have here on the right-hand side towards countries. Fears that electronic, key vital resources are kind of threatened by an attack. For example, like water supply is cut off because of it, or power supply is kind of cut off by a hack, or other vital services are switched off through these kind of cyber attacks. This has for a very long time, this was the ultimate idea about cyber attacks, was to kind of having hacks which kind of disrupt modern life in big ways. A lot of people, and also technical people, think that this is maybe a bit overblown because it's not as feasible as it might be seen as a threat. But many other forms of threats are appearing, also for countries are appearing, which have not been on the agenda. One which we talk much more about at the end of this lecture is this idea about spreading misinformation to influence elections in countries. And that is one case which was really kind of done, most prominently done in the United States, and possibly also done in the British referendum on Brexit, is that misinformation has not been kind of spread generally random, but rather spread to further one side of the message, and this kind of side which is more favorable for the external actor. So in the case of the United States, Russia actively used this kind of cyber technology to spread fake information via Twitter, Facebook, and other social media. And people believe that this is actually kind of the truth. And there is some kind of, well, it's very difficult to see how much effect it has on the people. But in this case, there's some kind of evidence that actually this had an influence on the outcome of the election in the United States. One company which kind of rose to infamous prominence here is Cambridge Analytica, a company which specialized, came out of some research project at Cambridge University, but specialized on using large sets of data to kind of target people with certain messages. And it has been dissolved since then, but it shows the potential risk which arises from these kind of targeted spread of fake news, which is not necessarily the same as these initially old school hacks. We were thinking about hacking a certain infrastructure, but rather kind of causing disbelief and might sway elections and other kind of decisions in countries in one direction or the other. Until now, there are kind of social media made lots of effort to reduce the risk of this happening, or centralized organizational things to happen in this way, by flagging messages which are obviously untrue, by flagging messages which are spreading hatred, etc. But it's still, even 4 years after the elections in the United States, this is still not solved yet, and lots of things to do still. So excuse me. My apologies. This is the kind of threats which happen to countries. To individuals, there are also, and companies, there are also threats. So the most common threat is actually theft of identity. People stealing passwords, stealing identities, and therefore enabling themselves to do something with your own life, for example. Gaining financial benefits, shopping unlicensed, any kind of things you could think about it. This is very frequently done, very easily done, especially towards individuals. Why towards individuals? Often they don't have necessarily the technical capabilities to prevent this, or the technicians know how to recognize when they are attacked, and so this can be very fruitful. It can lead from unsophisticated ways of so-called of emails which ask people to donate or to spend money for certain things on basically kind of making an effort on these emails towards more sophisticated ways of encrypting hard drives and asking for a ransom for decrypting these kind of hardware. So we do have many kind of different forms of these kind of threats towards individual companies, but very often they are kind of centered around the idea of leading malware, which leads to kind of identity theft, and therefore can kind of enable them. For companies, one big second issue is the notion of intellectual property theft. So very often intellectual property is not very well secured within the companies and can be stolen by either competitors or governments which want to further their interests, their industries, and help them. So we do find these kind of intellectual property theft also quite frequently, and several countries have been accused of promoting like statewide intellectual property theft, which is often very difficult to prove in detail, but it seems that certain countries have even national programs where they try to kind of promote a theft of information in this way. So, of course, one of the, if we kind of look at the state level, we can kind of think about different things. We can think about what is called Cyberwar. That is kind of real open warfare between countries trying to harm each other, which hasn't been happened yet, at least not officially. I show you a case of Estonia in a later point, where some people say, some experts say that this constitutes an attack, a cyber war, or constitutes to the level of cyber war. But cyber crimes or something is a lower level, is something which we have very frequently. So ransomware, true extent is unknown how much, because we don't know how many people are actually paying. They can be done on a global level, of course, because of the global nature of the internet. So it is very difficult to track who is actually behind them and what kind of resources they are getting. The same thing is true about cyber espionage. It seems that it's a very important part in espionage nowadays to have cyber capabilities and steal information this way. Having said that, we have basically no information how extensive this is. We know that there is a certain 5i network of Canada the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, which are in large scale trying to gain information about other actors. Several years back, I think maybe 8 years back, there has been a big, one of these schemes has been exposed when it became known that the United States spied on private calls from other world leaders, including world leaders of own allies. So the Brazilian president Russo was spied on, as well as the German Prime Minister Angela Merkel. Both it became known. There have been apologies about it, and but not much happened after that. So we can expect that cyber espionage is a very very strong kind of driver, and that exists on large scale. Cyber terrorism seems to be very plausible, and some people even argue, why is it not more frequently happening? That actually terrorist organizations use the cyberspace to plan terrorist attacks. If we kind of see this, then especially if we look at Islamic terrorism, what we do find is that cyberspace is used heavily, but not necessarily to kind of do attacks, but rather to one side recruit people, and the other side also to spread information about the terrorist attacks, but also about the messages behind it. So terrorist organizations very often are mastered in self-promotion, and also kind of recruiting, using the cyberspace heavily to recruit new members. So the international nature of this is very important and interesting for these actors, because it helps them to be in a completely different space. For example, being in Syria or any other kind of place, and promoting recruiting in Europe and other places. There are also kind of, in terms of cyber warfare, there is a kind of new attempts to use weapons in kind of switching off the internet, kind of using lots of weapons are in development. This becomes very quickly highly technical, so I don't go into detail in it. But what we can say from it is that we are really, in terms of cyber warfare, we are really in the beginning of it. We do know that, of course, drones are kind of are an important factor of cyber warfare already nowadays. They can be controlled from anywhere in the world, which makes the nature of wars very different, and kind of reduces for the one party the loss of life. So we have this use of drones has been in Iraq, in Iran, but also in Afghanistan by the United States, have been heavily used. Also, other actors, they use drones frequently. There has also been kind of counteraction. So an attack on Israel, has been done. An attack on Saudi Arabia has been done, presumably by Iranian drones, and it is known that Israel actually downed one of the Iranian drones at a certain time by counter-hacking it. So cyber warfare is emerging, and it will become very will probably be quite prominent in the near to midterm future. One aspect what we do have to see here is this will change the nature of wars. Maybe making losses of military even less likely. But the question is, what are the consequences? So especially if technically very involved countries can reduce the risks during wars, that might actually not make wars less likely, but even more likely. if you want to hear more about these ideas, yeah, feel free to kind of join me now in next year's class on international bargaining. We will talk about risks of wars there and more, and this kind of risk will be one of the parts. Okay, sorry for the advertisement here. Okay, the international, as I said in the very beginning, that the internet primarily started as a self-governing body, and that this kind of over time, many people realized that there should be a more kind of formalized idea about cyberspace, cyber peace, and what is often called cyber stability, principles of cyber stability. And so within the framework of the United Nations, there's been promotion to cybersecurity increasing, and kind of try the idea to develop international laws around it. So the idea, I'm not going through all these points here, but the idea here primarily is that countries should together develop a code of conduct of cyber stability and cyber peace. So not every government should go individually and kind of develop its own actions and counter actions. But because of the international nature of the internet, there should be a joint effort to say kind of come up with a unified code of conduct, which of course ideally would be under the auspices of an international organization, like something like the United Nations. What we do see here is that also that this kind of the emphasis here is that it should implement security of individuals, also resilience, as well as efforts to minimize the effect of violence in the cyber space. The one problem which is there is that there's very little appetite by governments to organize this multilaterally. So some countries would be happy to do it, but many countries at the moment are not willing to create an effort to have international rules on cyber stability and cyber peace. Especially, this is problematic since some countries like China, for example, have a very different idea about what the key functions of the internet are and how it should be used and what kind of freedoms are acceptable and what not. So let me change this kind of topic from this more general approaches towards the business sector. And so what we do see is that actually that a big part of the cyberspace, how we know it, is kind of placed by companies. So it's in private hands. It's private. So these organizations want to work internationally, and at the same time they want to have a very strongest reach, and also want to have the most harmonious kind of cooperation between the different actors in there. But sometimes this becomes quite difficult. So organizations might be stretched and in kind of obeying to laws in all different countries. Also, there might be kind of conflicts between laws of several countries and the ideas of human rights. For example, we can see this very well in the situation of Hong Kong at the moment. If there are many countries have rules that social media needs to provide states under certain conditions with information about activities of people on their platform. But at the moment, in the situation in Hong Kong, is rapidly changing, and the new national security law kind of puts higher levels of uncertainty over the what people are allowed, but also what this data will be used for. So we have companies very often face a dilemma that they have certain own values, but at the same time they have to apply to international to the law within these countries, and so they're often torn between the one and the other. What we have seen that actually happens with some international companies is that they are, for example, not operating in countries like China because they're not willing to actually follow the national laws which would be necessary to obey in order to operate there. We have seen these kind of difficulties not just in China but many countries in the world, and it's still not kind of clear how individual countries can resolve this. There are issues about, for example, about self-harm. There are issues about violence on these platforms. Versus, just to give you one example where this is very difficult to explain, is so there are certain international observers, including UN international observers, build up an archive of violations of human rights in Syria using YouTube. So a private company which belongs to Google, they uploaded films there because it's an archive to kind of document these violations of human rights. But these kind of movies or films, of course, have might be restricted in many countries to see, and so kind of a stronger enforcement of these kind of ideas of harm can actually kind of lead to deletion of things which are kind of good projects. And so we do have very big challenges for individual companies in this space as well. There has been one maybe notable effort by companies like by Facebook in recent years, which tried to kind of develop a governing body which is above the operative decision-making process of Facebook. This body should act independently of the company itself, and actually Facebook advocated that other companies will cooperate and also join the same organization. Having said that, until now it doesn't seem to be a very strong governing body, and major decisions are still taken within the company. And we have seen this in recent discussions on Black Lives Matter, where Facebook refused to take down messages of politicians, even if they promote openly hatred. And this, one of the most notable cases was a Facebook message by Donald Trump, which kind of is widely regarded as spreading hatred in the United States. So what I want to say here is basically that businesses are very important players within the cyberspace, but are often very much torn between them and have difficult positions. So there are also kind of some actors, some people are critical of private businesses as actors as well, because of their kind of the amount of power they have over people worldwide. But what at the moment at least seems to be the bigger concern is that these companies are not able to balance well state regulations on a national level and maybe international desires to human rights, etc. Of course, what we also do have on the state level, on the on the business level is the idea about cyber attacks, which are kind of still vulnerable. So we can think about this in terms of protocols and the hardware supply chain, but also in terms of code, etc. So why is that so important? Why would we kind of talk about this so much? Well, because the vulnerabilities in service providers makes also individuals really vulnerable who use these services. So if we use certain internet providers, if we use, but also if we kind of have services which have very sensitive data about us, let's say health providers, etc. And cyber attacks can be very harmful for users as well. So just to summarize the private sector cybersecurity, is that what we see is that there are lots of varying challenges for these companies, and often there are something which is called best practice, like the amount of investment in which should go into cybersecurity, as well as the data protection, etc., etc. But very often these companies don't necessarily meet these levels, and also on top of this, there are very difficult questions to be answered, which are not so easily possible to solve in the short run, like I sketched out with the ideas of Facebook recently. So within this kind of this framework of cybersecurity, we do have to also understand that this is an early, that we are in a relatively early stage of this, even though most of you might have been growing up all their lives with the internet and couldn't think of life without it. But in a way, it is still a very young topic, and because of its far reach, it's important to develop a legal framework which is sensible. So the US administration has actually kind of launched an international strategy for cyberspace, which has been acting for several years now, but there is still a lack of activity, or critiques say that it's not very effective yet, and is predominantly focusing on reducing the rights of individuals rather than kind of developing a comprehensive strategy. So in terms of securing the state in form of cybersecurity, in a way as an infrastructure project to kind of to not allow any kind of hacks which would kind of be kind of threatening serious infrastructure within the countries. We can see that the 2013 State of the Union address in the United States by President Obama at the time, which focused on cyber threats to national critical infrastructure. So he made a case that governments need to be involved, and that this role is very important in order to kind of prevent any infrastructure-wide attacks. So what was the idea of to prevent this kind of threats? The first point was that information needs to be shared and needs to be publicly available, so that you can actually ask for information about your own privacy, and that there is a mechanism to be able to get this information. That it's ensured that your privacy and civil liberty is protected, and that there is a voluntary cybersecurity framework developed in the long run, which helps to kind of structure these and codify this cybersecurity rather than having ad hoc decisions on specific actors. One thing which is becoming which is not on the slide, but which is becoming more important in recent years, is the idea about cybersecurity being threatened by infrastructure providers. So maybe the most well-known case for this is the current build-up of the G5 network on a global stage, and Huawei being one of the main suppliers of technology for the G5 network. So one of the worries of several Western countries, especially of the United States, is that Huawei has very close ties to the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government more generally, and therefore that there's a risk that this company would include some backdoors in their technology, which enables foreign actors, or in this case enables China, to either use these networks for their advantage or sabotage them in a way that they are unusable. Having said that, Huawei has claimed several times that this is not the case, that they are independent, that they have not built in any of these kind of backdoors. They also did not know, at least no official information is available that this is really the case and that this can be built up like this. But the concern is still kind of continuing to be existent, and many countries are either kind of like Western countries decided not to use Huawei technology out of fear of their cybersecurity, or they're making strong limitations on how it can be used. Having said that, in China, this is seen as very different. It's seen as a market manipulation that Chinese companies get a disadvantage because of certain rumors. From the outside, it's very difficult to see what merit these kind of claims have, but it seems to be a concern for many countries, especially Western countries, over the security of Huawei. So, in terms of regulating the cyberspace, we have different approaches, and so we have on the one hand what is called the state-centric approach. Maybe China has a prototype of these kind of as an example. So in a way, we do feel that everything is controlled in the state-centric. Everything is controlled by the government, and they have complete control over the cyber infrastructure and also the cyber content which is available. And then we have market-driven approaches, like in the United States, where actually the control of the state is much less prominent, and it is more driven by companies, which are then kind of key actors, which might need to provide information to government, but not necessarily that government is building up this structure. We could see that the United States, the United Kingdom is closer to the US, EU maybe somewhere in the middle, Israel actually I would put a bit further into the state-centric, and Russia as well. So we can also kind of compare this as a voluntary versus regulatory approach. While China has a very strong regulatory aspect, the US has a much more stronger voluntary aspect of it. So the question now is then, how can we kind of approach this in terms of international law? Can we develop international laws which are kind of common? And so how should they be applied? So we do have like international laws overall are kind of difficult, but we do find certain issues like nuclear war, outer space, Antarctica, where organizations have been successful, more or less successful, in order to coordinate actions beyond political systems. And normally these were spaces which cannot easily be defined as belonging to the state, to one state or another. So this is something which lots of people say the internet has an analogy for it, because it goes beyond borders and therefore is also not easy to be regulated on a national level. Having said that, there is of course still a different interpretation of how the internet, what the internet should be. And countries like China, but also more Russia and Venezuela and several others see the cyberspace as a summary of tools which can be used predominantly on a national level, and kind of advance the technology to only use it on this national level. What we would find, of course, from this is that then there is this kind of idea of an overreaching connection, a global connection would be lost, and we would have something which is this balkanization of the internet, where each kind of entity is more or less doing its individual kind of network, which is then not well connected to other networks. Of course, we would lose a lot of the opportunities and possibilities by this kind of approach. So there are lots of advocates still which say, like, we do need international regulations on a global level, and in order to kind of address this global problem. So in a way, we could say, like, there is nothing there yet which is kind of working very well, but the first start would be necessary in order to kind of secure the global aspect of the cyber world. Well, one thing which I want to, which is a side note, but which I want to highlight is that in a way, cyber technology makes it also possible for actors to become prominent, which have not been easily prominent before. And so I think that typical example we can see here is Wikileaks, which actually kind of has played, especially in the beginning of the century, a very important role in finding and exposing secrets of states, and predominantly the United States, but also other actors, which were kind of actions which were supposed to be hidden or not kind of made publicly available. So the most prominent case maybe here is the video about it, which is called the collateral murder, a video which shows during the Iraq War, where a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions by the United States military, where basically health workers have been attacked by a United States helicopter. This video was kind of created as by a webcam of or a body cam of a soldier, and then by Manning kind of taken out of the military and provided to Wikileaks, which then spread it on a global level. So these kind of secrets, there were several kind of leaks, many leaks, which some include the US, some include the United Kingdom, some include tax schemes, tax fraud, and many different kind of forms of leaks which were exposed by WikiLeaks, as well as having an influence on the last elections in 2016, the United States presidential elections, by exposing some of Hillary Clinton's emails So we have seen quite a lot of these kind of exposures, and they have, at the one hand, they have made people more aware about state secrets, but they have also been seen as a threat to governments. The U.S. claims very much that this kind of endangered lives in their of their military and also their espionage environment. But another issue, which I think is maybe more critical, is that unbalanced release of information might actually kind of have, again, kind of perspective which is not necessarily kind of balanced, and therefore kind of can be used strategically to tilt opinion in one way or another. However, the role of Wikileaks, while it is its founder Julian Assange is now in the UK imprisoned for jumping bail. It's a longer story. We can talk about this in class more. But lots of governments have seen it as a threat. But lots of people have also seen that this is a very good thing to have these kind of exposure of secrets and whistleblowing, because it helps to have a more transparent and more open society as well. But we do also see, and that is something in terms of if I go towards the threat level, is that on a routine basis now, computer systems are kind of probed and try to expose vulnerabilities, especially of people who have lots of information and not necessarily are computer experts. So in this way, what I have here is just an example of the US Congress, where we see that computer systems are kind of very frequently attacked. And here we have like 1.8 billion times per month, and it costs 8 billion on an annual basis to keep these systems secure. What we did find in other countries, like for example in Germany, is that the network of the German Bundestag, the German Parliament, has been infiltrated, and it could and information could be gained by these infiltrators for several months. They had access to the internal network of the German Parliament. So stealing these information might be a serious threat as well, because it can reveal information which is not necessarily there for external actors. For example, if we talk about international negotiations, people can have higher levels of information by providing getting access to internal information of actors, etc. So one problem is that very often these networks are maybe well secured, but used by actors which are not very tech savvy, and therefore might make mistakes in order to kind of use these the facilities and open doors to attackers in this way. Another thing which is very common is the idea of cell phone malware, and that is something which is also becoming very difficult, because mobile phones are nowadays, many people have smartphones, and there are more mobile phones than actually people on the planet in circulation at the moment. And these mobile phones are tools with many devices. So they have microphones, they have cameras. I'm creating this also with my mobile phone at the moment. They have lots of our private information, and they have also very often GPS trackers to kind of locate the people. So in this way, they are ideal kind of spy tools as well. And large-scale spying can happen in this through mobile phones very easily. And there's a big concern that actually big surveillance of very large parts of the population can be done with these kind of through certain apps. So they can be either hacked or they can also be kind of apps, as we have seen in the recent year when you entered China into the Uyghur region. Mandatorily, the Chinese border control actually installed a tracking app on your mobile phone, and their social credit system within China is also aimed to actually kind of monitor people via their mobile phones more and more and more. So we do have here kind of the possibility of very strong monitoring of individuals. An attack which we could, which I want to highlight at this point is actually, this is a real case which happened in 2007 in Estonia, like one of the Baltic countries. And as you might know, is that Russia is very unhappy about the Baltic countries joining the European Union, and constantly is frequently threatening the countries. And one of we could see it maybe as a trying of the Russian capabilities was that government, financial media, computers, and networks were paralyzed in a series of attacks where in Estonia, lots of the activities of the actors like tax payments, internet banking, etc., are very important. And so in the way, this could be seen as a trial run by the by Russian, probably state hackers, to see how effective their tools are in deleting or interrupting the infrastructure of whole states. So in this was a quite early attack, but it's maybe one of these kind of more straightforward attacks. We were thinking about cyber attacks in the beginning, but it actually used it affected large parts of Estonia's network for several weeks. And as a consequence, Estonia actually built up institutions to much stronger protect them and kind of building a much stronger cybersecurity defense mechanism, which is one of the leading ones in Europe by now. Another example which I would like to highlight here is this kind of, it's called a virus called Stuxnet. So this worm was targeting, the idea was actually to slow down Iran's development of nuclear weapons. And the way it was done was basically that malware was inserted in some of the drivers of the centrifuges of to kind of produce a pure plutonium, and this kind of led to a this led to a wrong behavior of these centrifuges at the end, and kind of destroyed the centrifuges as well as kind of did not produce the desired plutonium. So in a way, Stuxnet was often seen as a very like a successful case of hindering Iran of getting nuclear weapons. But at the same time, it also shows how vulnerable industries and also critical infrastructure can be by attacking the software, which is the most rudimentary kind of firmware, which is used to kind of guarantee its operation. This is something which is often also kind of worried about, for example, mobile phones, that the firmware could be malicious or could have backdoors which are impossible to see for anybody who is using these apparatus. The last example I want to talk briefly about here is the threat for elections and democracy. And I talked about this already in the beginning. If you want to know more about it, I have a YouTube video you could very much, I would encourage you to look at as well. And so basically what we have seen, especially in the US elections, is that fake news have been promoted so much that it is and so organized from one actor, basically most likely the Russian state, but basically from Russian hackers, that it led towards an imbalance in the perceptions of the citizens about their political state of affairs. There are lots of kind of issues why this happened. So the tools of Twitter and Facebook, which unlike normal media did not have the same kind of check of the resources or the sources of the information, the way it can be spread, like things can trend on Twitter, for example, helped to kind of gain these algorithms. But the most important aspect about especially Cambridge Analytica was that it was able to gain very high amount of personal data via Facebook and kind of more or less stole this information. And that helped them to be able to categorize people in different categories. What kind of political position they are likely to have, what kind of the character they are, what they are scared of, and what kind of interests they have, etc., was all available in this data set. And this data set was very, very big, and it could be used strategically. So campaigners of fake news could target people individually about what kind of information they should see. For example, people who are likely to vote conservative, or in this case Donald Trump, could get messages which strengthen their opinions by, for example, showing fake events of mass migration or anything like this, which actually kind of strengthens their motivation and their motivation to vote. While at the same time, people who would maybe lean more towards democratic vote, voting Democrats, would actually get information which is kind of frustrating them and suppressing their likelihood of actually participating in the election. So with these kind of quite sophisticated tools, it was not just that misinformation could be spread, but actually that this could be spread in a targeted way. And that helped, presumably helped to actually have an impact on the elections in the United States, but also on the referendum in the Brexit referendum in the UK, and also has been seen present in several elections, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, France, but also in India. So on a global level, this has become a very kind of big issue, and it's not clear how to deal with this completely. So these individual companies like Twitter and Facebook try to monitor the system better. They try to actually find information which are kind of developed by bots and block them. But whether this is sufficient, we don't know yet, and actually only the future will tell. So please have a look at the video. It's really interesting to know more about Cambridge Analytica, and I look forward very much to our discussion in class.